Hello and welcome to this special presentation, Digital Inclusion 101 and Research and Education Networks. I'm Stephanie Stenberg, the Director of the Internet 2 Community Anchor Program, also known as CAP. And CAP works with the 46 state and regional research and education networks that connect over 80,000 community anchor institutions across the United States. Today, we're pleased to welcome our colleagues from the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. We will be learning about digital inclusion and what that really means, including terminology, data, research, program models and resources, and policies and opportunities. Now I'll turn things over to Munire and Pamela. Pamela?
Hello, everybody. Welcome. Let me start sharing my screen and then we can get started. All right, can I get a thumbs up if you're all able to see my screen, Digital Inclusion 101? Okay, perfect, thank you. All right, so welcome to the Digital Inclusion 101 webinar. We are so excited to be here. We're excited for the question and answer portion at the end. And let's just get started. All right, so for today's agenda, we're gonna talk about just introducing what NDIA, how we started and what we do. We'll also share the survey results that we did with the working group last month. And then we'll dive into understanding the problem of the digital divide, which is crucial for figuring out what the solution is. We'll talk about Broadband 101, digital inclusion efforts, diving deep into the ecosystem for digital inclusion, as well as how to stay connected, and then opening it up for question and comments after. So I will like to introduce myself. My name is Pamela Rosales, pronouns she, hers. I am the Training and Engagement Manager, and I am here with my lovely coworker, Munire. Munire, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Munire Santiago Jester, and I'm a program manager with NDIA, and I've been lucky to work in digital inclusion for the last 9 years, all the way from helping build networks, developing programs, or starting coalitions. So I'm really excited to learn from you guys. And I see there's a lot of awesome experts from everywhere. So thank you for having me.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so let's talk about NDIA. Who are we? So we are a unified voice for home and public broadband, personal devices, and local technology training and support programs. We represent folks like you at the national and federal government, and we started 7 years ago because there was nobody representing the people on the ground doing this work. And we are also a place for peer-to-peer learning, and all of the data and resources that we have on our website is coming from folks on the ground because you are all the experts. We divide up our work into these 4 different buckets. So first is practitioner support, policy work, awareness, data, and research. So we accomplish this through our peer-to-peer networking. We get experts and those new into the field to talk to each other and share resources. And it's also a way for us to document. So we take what we learn and we try to influence public policy and awareness of the issue. And since we are able to hear from practitioners on the ground, we can see the discrepancies between data versus what folks are actually experiencing. And we'll talk about those discrepancies when we're talking more about digital redlining. Okay, so in January, like I said earlier, we conducted a survey and hosted a working group discussion to facilitate peer-to-peer support and discuss those survey findings. So I want to share with you all what we found for those who weren't part of that working group. So over 90% of respondents reported doing some form of digital inclusion work. More than half of those surveyed are working on broadband access. There's also a significant amount of work on technical support and policy work. And then the last 3 common efforts are digital skills training, computer devices, and participation with digital inclusion coalitions. Also, other efforts that weren't as popular but are still existing within the group is digital navigation, building own fiber networks in the school, involvement with state broadband leader network, and collaborative grant projects. And I also want to note that there were also organizations in the working group that haven't started any digital inclusion efforts. And the range of those who are doing digital inclusion efforts vary. We have organizations that have a very robust digital inclusion program, and some of them who just started their program, and everything in between. We also found that the top 3 institutions that you're all partnering with for digital inclusion work are K-12 higher education, government, and libraries. So other organizations that you partnered with include nonprofits, health organizations, internet service providers, workforce and economic development. And then lastly, we asked a group of what areas of digital inclusion work your organization would like to expand on. And the most popular focus was on broadband access. And other areas that people were most interested in were technical support, building digital inclusion coalition, and digital skills training. So because of those findings, our insightful discussion during the working group session, our presentation will be spotlighting broadband, building a digital inclusion program, and the ecosystem for digital inclusion, where we'll highlight coalitions. Okay, so now we're going to focus on understanding the digital divide. So first, let's talk about digital equity. And it's a condition in which all individuals and communities have the information technology capacity needed for full participation in our society, democracy, and economy. So full participation looks like being able to submit a job application, feeling confident showing up in a virtual interview, knowing that your internet is stable, and landing a job so that you can have upward mobility. It also looks like knowing how to log into Zoom so you can attend your group therapy sessions, or knowing how to sign into your email so you can retrieve an old password so you can log back into your online account and finish that HR training that we all have to do at the end of the year. And it also looks like someone having the digital skills to apply for benefits like SNAP or medical assistance. And for folks who have the digital skills to navigate these devices, have a strong internet connection, and who have strong internet access, it's very easy for us to assume that everyone is on the same page, that everyone knows the difference between a smartphone, tablet, and a laptop, and which one is more appropriate for downloading large files. So let's take a moment to think about what it takes to submit a job application. So first, you need to be able to download the application, which begs the question of what speed does your internet connection have when downloading that application? Do they know how to sign into their email to access that application? And after downloading that job application, do they know how to use the proper systems to fill it out? For example, is it a fillable PDF? And if so, do they know how to fill that out properly, or do they have to fill it out using Word doc or Google Docs? And do they know how to do that? For someone that does not have reliable internet connection or does not have digital skills to fill out the application, simply filling out a job application can be a long-winded, frustrating process, let alone the emotional and intellectual capacity it takes to actually fill it out. So in order to reach digital equity, we have to first understand how we got here to begin with. So a lot of NDIA's knowledge comes from practitioners on the ground doing this work, and this frames what we look for when we try to identify the barriers to digital equity. So one barrier is access to affordable broadband. So this barrier is linked to cost, in which the group that is most digitally excluded are those that are low income. And the second barrier to digital equity is affordable, adequate, and appropriate devices. So affordability allows for everyone to have access to those devices, and adequate because you need to have devices that work well and are up to date. I'm sure we are all familiar that just because something is affordable doesn't necessarily mean that it's efficient. So for example, imagine streaming your favorite Netflix show on a flip phone. It's just not gonna work, okay? It's gonna be pixelated, and I don't even know if you could even sight in. And appropriate devices, because each device has its own strengths and weaknesses. For example, a tablet is great for mobility, but most of the time you can't make calls on them. A smartphone is great, but it's not the right device to use when you're doing an online presentation, doing a Zoom interview for a job, or downloading large files. And the last barrier to digital equity is digital skills. So if someone doesn't know how to use their device or navigate the internet to find that job posting, or to download and use apps like WeChat or WhatsApp to stay connected to their community, then it's going to be difficult if they had a strong and fast internet connection or have the appropriate device. So these three things, affordable broadband, affordable and adequate devices, and digital skills, I like to look at them as pillars. So these three pillars can uphold digital equity, or they are pillars that can be reliant in the digital divide, and a way to keep the most vulnerable in our communities from fully participating in our society if we're not adequately addressing each of those stools. All right. So in 2020, we published a white paper titled Limiting Broadband Investment to Rural Only, Discriminates against Black Americans and Other Communities of Color, which Munire will put in the chat. And in it, we highlight the excessive focus on broadband deployment into rural areas, which are predominantly white, non-Hispanic populated areas, and the lack of deployment into urban communities. And this policy framework is counterproductive and structurally racist because in general, non-Hispanic white Americans are more likely than any other racial group to have broadband subscriptions, while Black and other people of color are less likely. And because what we learn from data is that urban cities and counties in the United States have many more residents who lack home broadband service than do rural counties. And the residents in households without broadband in our urban data sets are people of color. And I also want to talk about digital redlining. So digital redlining is discrimination by internet service providers, or ISPs for short, in deployment, maintenance, upgrade, or delivery of internet services. So in lower income communities, we tend to see is that there are areas where they don't receive the newer technologies or upgrades. They don't receive the service that higher income neighborhoods get. And this is because internet service providers view their service as a commercial service, and they do not see internet access as a civil right, as a necessary utility like water, like heat, to be able to function and be part of our community and society. And so they don't really have a reason to serve everybody equitably unless they want to from the goodness of their heart. And that's why your work is super important, and our community is so important, because we have to figure out how to change that, whether it's through policy change or solutions at the local level. So let's look at this map on the right side of the screen. In 2017, NDIA, alongside Connect Your Community, conducted a mapping analysis of FCC broadband availability in Cleveland, Ohio. And we found that AT&T systemically discriminated against lower income Cleveland neighborhoods in its deployment of home internet and video technologies over the past decade. And AT&T withheld fiber enhanced broadband improvements from most Cleveland neighborhoods with high poverty rates. And you can read more about that research in the article AT&T Digital Redlining of Cleveland, which Munire will put into the chat. So speaking of broadband, I will pass it on to Munire to talk more and dive deep on broadband.
Thank you, Pamela. Thank you guys for joining. And then I recognizing that there's several of you that do already work with broadband, and so this is going to be very basic and don't don't feel like you can join in, and then maybe at the end maybe we can clarify some things. But we believe that in the work in digital inclusion, we need to understand what is the definitions, how we frame the digital divide, but also understand a little bit about broadband. So next slide. So as Pamela was saying, so working in digital inclusion, we have to right off the bat say digital inclusion efforts work on broadband. It treats broadband as a utility, right? The same way we need water and sewer and electricity to function and to participate in society and to be healthy in members of our community, we need to have broadband at home. So we like to say that, broadband is the base, is the great equalizer, because now not only you become a consumer, you have the ability to not only consume information, but also to produce information to be part of society. Next slide. When we refer to broadband, we really advocate for access to at the household level. So how people, usually the family, not necessarily concerned, right? The end user, not necessarily concerned. How does it work? How did the internet come here? Is it wireless? Is it through a cable? Is it, how is it that connectivity is getting to me? They're interested that they have connectivity to do the things that they need to do, to do homeschool, check the grades, apply for jobs. So, and we really advocate, again, household level connectivity with a reliable connection. Next one. So what is broadband? So broadband is really the transmission of wide broadband data over high-speed internet connection. So here on the chart, you see that for what we connect in the internet speeds are megabits per second. So how much do you need to send an email? right? You see that's over recommended speed is 1 megabit, but then that's per device. So if I have somebody browsing the internet, one device, you can use to 3 to 5 megabits. That's how much is required. And then if you have more than one devices, and more than one, you have a mom and a dad and a kid using that connectivity, you need better, reliable broadband than some of the speeds. So you see here the Federal Communications Commission is the entity that create the outline of what is considered broadband. So in 2011, so 4 megabits download by 1 megabits upload was like, if you have that level, that's considered broadband. That definition of broadband was updated in 2015, and the current one is 25 download and 3 upload, and that's the current definition. We believe that that's not enough, right? As you can see the chart, how much is the recommended speed to send an email per device. So you can do the math there, right? It's not enough. So when we advocating for connectivity, we talked about reliable connectivity and connectivities that allow families to fully participate in technology. Next slide. So again, keep in mind that this webinar is really an introduction, right? So it's we're going to go very bird's eye view of the field of digital inclusion and some of the terminology and some of the programs. So NDIA have a lot of resources out there that we're going to, can dig a little bit deeper into this, but understanding how broadband works is, again, it's very important because you see that broadband, to actually provide a connectivity at home, there needs to be a wire, there needs to be infrastructure, right? Wireless doesn't work if there's a cable, there's infrastructure somewhere. So if you think about, we talk about backbone, middle mile, and last mile. So backbone, you can see is the red connection there, like go across the country and actually go under the ocean and connect every continent, every country have to have a backbone connection. So actual hardware, if you will, like a wire running throughout the globe to make sure that data and that connectivity, it can travel through the cable. So that's a backbone, is the bigger wireless, the big wire connection infrastructure for broadband. Middle mile is when we have this little, you see the dot there connects to a middle mile. So within each region, there is a connect, then you can kind of connect to that backbone and build the middle mile. And the middle mile sometimes goes around cities and counties, and then from there, you need somebody to tap in to build the last mile. The last mile goes into that, that level to bring the connectivity back to the home. So how is that my house is able to connect to the internet and we all able to connect and have this conversation? There is infrastructure out there. There's a backbone, there's a middle mile, there's a last mile that ends in my side of my house and bring the connectivity to my home. Next slide. So again, right, understanding broadband. So there's wired, there's the fixed line, for example, is a physical line for a point of service. So here's some example of different fixed lines, right? It's DSL, it uses local phone lines. There is cable, and it's usually wires and rather than telephone poles, so it's connecting that. So, and there is fiber, which is a different, right? It's made of glass, and it's the fastest infrastructure we can put down to provide future-proof technology solutions to homes. So that's another area that we need to expand. So if we get, right, the infrastructure bill is passed, right, the Infrastructure Act is there, and there's a lot of money for infrastructure. So what infrastructure are we planning to put out in a community? Is that infrastructure the best solution for our community? And it's going to allow several people to use, in a family, in a household, to use the internet together. So we can dive a little bit deeper in that on the Q&A if you guys want. Next slide. So again, this is the idea of wireless. So it's a sometimes fixed wireless, and relies on mobile and satellite. And to have a wireless service, needs to be a wired infrastructure somewhere. So sometimes people are like, oh, you don't have wired infrastructure, and let's just put wireless everywhere. It's like, well, that's not how exactly how it can work, and you need to have some infrastructure to tap into. And we're going really fast on this, so we have time for Q&A, and then the end, next one. So a lot of in broadband infrastructure, sometimes what it looks like, sometimes is trenching, right? To put the wire and the last miles through the house. Sometimes it's working through telephone poles. Some, ISPs use the telephone poles and leverage those resources in the community to bring connectivity and expand access points for the broadband infrastructure. So you here just see some examples of wireless poles, a wireless connection that's really creating. There's a wire infrastructure going to the Wi-Fi, and then the wireless point in which send out a signal that your device and my device is able to tap into. But there is a need for infrastructure, and infrastructure is expensive. So I think it's good to just keep that in mind. Next slide. Make sure. Thank you. So we talked a little bit about internet service provider, and not the best light, and not every service provider is like AT&T. On the case of the Cleveland, due to redlining study that you guys see there. But what we have found is that the number of internet service providers has been increasing dramatically, and I see there's some of you guys here that before they're the gateway to the internet. So the ISPs really tend to use cable and telephone lines to provide that service. But there's also like other types of ISPs and internet service providers that we even have someone in the call, right? That it's really, they can be local companies, and there's other companies that really focus on wireless and just building that the antenna to push out the signal so everybody can tap into. Another way that we advocate for this really ecosystem of ISPs providing services, really community networks. And community networks, if you go to the next slide, we've seen that there's a tremendous growth in community networks throughout the country. And community networks are broadband organizations that have built out a consortium, or that they use infrastructure, wired infrastructure from an anchor institution, from an education institution, maybe from the city, maybe from the university, and then from you tap into that backbone alongside with a nonprofit organization in the community, and they create this consortium, this group to really manage and provide the last mile solutions to communities. So each state, for example, I'm in San Antonio. San Antonio, we own our electric company, and our electric company has fiber throughout the city. So if you get light in San Antonio, sometimes they say we do have dark fiber there, but based on our legislature in the state, the city cannot provide internet connection to my home. They're competing against the ISPs, and that's thanks to the lobbying of AT&T. So one way that some of our communities in Texas are finding a way around is really creating this community network where the city is not necessarily, and the government institution is not necessarily the one providing the end user the service, but they're creating this consortium, this cooperative to provide that service. So there is strategies, and there's more innovative ways that communities are getting around to provide that connectivity to their neighborhoods. Next. So couple terminology that I'm going to close out when we talk about broadband. Is important to know that there is a difference between availability, what's availability and what that means. So availability for us, broadband equity is not equal availability. So sometimes, and you see ISPs have been getting away, the big ones of like asking, hey, do you service this neighborhood and where are the connectivity? Like, no, there is availability of internet in my area, but what that really means is that there's the ability, if one household within a census block or a census tract have the potential ability to tap into the network, then they count the whole block, the whole tract as having the availability of internet. So it's really availability. Can you get connected? And if you don't care about price, speed, and reliability, right? And how reliable it is. So it really means it's the service area, and sometimes that's not enough, right? To measure how's the digital divide looking for your community. Next slide. We understanding the difference, right, of underserved and unserved, right? So unserved is really, it doesn't matter what challenge you have. If you're a billionaire, you won't be able to get broadband at home because there is no infrastructure there for you to tap into. And then that's really unserved. And underserved is really what some of the stuff Pamela was pointing to with the digital red line, is really talking about the gap. So there is broadband infrastructure, some type of broadband infrastructure, but the speeds and how affordable it is and how reliable it is, it's really questioned. So when you have that challenge, it's really, we're talking about the underserved community. And that terminology, it's becoming very important for everybody to know, especially as with working with the states and now the Infrastructure Act coming down, there is a specific pot of money, and counting community underserved and underserved is going to be important on when we're doing the state digital equity plan for the next 5 years. So and it's funny, it's important to know that, because usually rural areas that have a lot of unserved communities, but urban areas, people say, oh, there's no digital divide because everybody, there's infrastructure everywhere, but the reality is that underserved, they can't afford, and the connectivity is not reliable. Next. So I'll pass back to Pamela, and we'll talk more about some of the digital inclusion efforts, and then I'll share more about digital inclusion ecosystems.
Awesome, thank you, Manire. So earlier we talked about the end goal of reaching digital equity, and the way to get there is through digital inclusion. And digital inclusion refers to the activities necessary to ensure that all individuals and communities, including the most disadvantaged, have access to and use of information and communication technologies. So digital inclusion is often referred to as a three-legged stool, and those three legs are affordable broadband, affordable devices, and digital skills training. And we cannot solve the digital divide unless all three legs of the stools are addressed. Because let's say you got a brand new MacBook Pro, you got a fast internet, but you don't know how to use it, there's a gap there, and vice versa to everything else. Okay, so let's talk about the 5 elements of digital inclusion. So 1, affordable, robust broadband internet service. Like we discussed, affordable doesn't always mean sufficient. And in the case of internet service providers, more expensive subscription plans doesn't always mean faster internet. The second element is internet-enabled devices that meets the needs of the user. 3, access to digital skills training, which we'll talk more about. 4, quality technical support. So this means that you're meeting the community member where they are at. And that also means digging and asking open-ended questions to understand what their needs really are. For example, are they looking to sign into their email so that they can communicate with family members? Or are they wanting to learn how to sign into their email so they can start applying for jobs? You're going to have 2 different approaches depending on what that answer is. And we'll also talk about these elements of empathy in our digital navigator section. And then lastly, applications and online content designed to enable and encourage self-sufficiency, participation, and collaboration. All right, so building a digital inclusion program. So many times folks who are doing this on the ground work don't realize that what they're actually doing is considered digital inclusion work. So for example, a librarian teaching a patron how to create a Gmail account and send an email, that's digital inclusion work. Teaching a college student how to upload their resume as a PDF versus a doc, that's also digital inclusion work. So since digital inclusion is a three-legged stool, it's only natural that building a digital inclusion program can be comprised of those individual components or be all comprehensive that includes all of those three elements of digital skills training, devices, and broadband access. So let's talk about them individually. We got the left icon of a man pointing, but we kind of want the digital navigator program to be like one-on-one, but you get the vibe. So digital skills training. So this is basic digital skills training. And these programs generally include some of the following elements. It includes teaching the patron components of a computer, how to turn it off, how to turn it on, how to restart, how to get to the internet. What does a folder mean? How to use a mouse and a keyboard. Somebody had shared in a previous digital navigator workshop that somebody had said they referred to their mouse as a rat, and I thought that was really funny. But just letting them be familiar with the different tools on how to actually use your device. Using an internet browser. What is cookies? What is a window? What is a bookmark? Things like that. Creating and using an email account, basics of word processing, privacy, security, and data protection. And this can be done in person or in a set of instructional videos. And for higher education, the training can be focused on specific applications like using Excel, Photoshop, helping them develop job skills like learning a project management tool, learning how to use Google or Microsoft Suite and certifications, which look really good on a resume. And it's also very important that you, again, know your community and your students really well. Who are you serving? Are they looking to learn basic skills, or are they more advanced where they want to learn coding? Are they young mothers? Are they international students? Are they seniors, new Americans? Do they have limited English proficiency? All of those facts are going to impact how you're going to provide these trainings. For affordable devices, some questions you can ask yourself is, how does your school make borrowing a laptop accessible? Is it available for students? Do you have computer labs? Is it possible for your institution to work with community organizations and for your students to use computer monitors? And then lastly, with affordable internet access, helping community members get internet access at a cost that they can afford is probably the most challenging digital inclusion goal and a community that a community can undertake. So generally they fall into categories of helping eligible community members find and sign up for discount internet programs if possible, or doing a community networking type like free Wi-Fi access in public spaces. Okay, so building a digital inclusion program leads to digital equity. This is how we achieve a world where everyone has the skills, devices, and broadband to fully participate in our society, democracy, and economy. So these digital skills building programs are more than just learning how to use a laptop. It's about connecting these individuals with the opportunity of upward mobility and a chance to break generational poverty. It's learning how to download and use free messaging apps like WeChat and WhatsApp for community folks to feel included, to connect with their family members, and know the issues impacting their community. And it's also about building the digital skills so they can fully engage in our society through voting, movement building, organizing, community organizing, and letting people hear what you have to say. And then lastly, the Digital Navigators program. So it's a model to provide one-to-one basic digital inclusion services like connectivity assistance, device assistance, and basic digital skills support over the phone or in person. It's important that being a digital navigator, you know that it's not about being Geek Squad or Apple support. You don't have to know how to code or be super techie. You just have to be able to know how to work your way through a laptop, typing simple research on the internet, downloading apps, things like that. And digital navigators are more similar to social workers in which you're meeting them where they're at with empathy, and you're using technology as a tool so that they feel empowered to participate online as much as they choose to. And I'll pass it over to Manire for ecosystems of digital inclusion.
Thanks, Pamela. Before I go in digital inclusion ecosystem, I think I'll put in the chat and then I think I've done. So what Pamela covers a bunch of different ways, different types of programs. And NDIA, we do have a startup manual that kind of goes a little bit deeper into, like, if you were looking to expand, computer digital literacy training, this is what some program models look like. This is what some of the curriculum look like and some of the learning outcomes. So here what we learned. So there is a lot of resource within on the startup manual, but feel free to reach out to us if you want to think about that a little bit further and want some more resources. The same thing if there's a lack of computer devices, how we can work together to provide affordable computer devices into the community. So there's a model that how we start a program that's really looking at refurbishing computers and getting donated computers into the schools, into the community. And then we also have affordable broadband offers. So we, an NDIA website, we do have a list of those resources. So then if you are interested in starting the program, something like that, you have something to get you start your effort. So so when you see digital inclusion, I know there's a lot here, and I always feel like my heart goes out because I feel like sometimes we want to cover so much and become so dense, but it really, what we're trying to convey is that it really takes a village, right? Digital inclusion efforts and closing the digital divide is really why I think all of you guys are here, and this is why NDIA exists. And for us, understanding that actually there's an ecosystem that really does the work of digital inclusion. And again, referring back, so digital equity is our goal. Digital inclusion is the programs, is the effort, and how we work together is the work that we do to get to the goal of digital equity. So, so digital inclusion ecosystems, next slide, are really the different organization and the combination of programs and policies that work together within a particular area to meet the needs of that community. So a digital inclusion ecosystem for Texas, where I am, it's might look very different than for some of you guys in Oklahoma or New York, right? So because, right, it's good to answer the needs of San Antonio community, you might have like all the programs, you might have to have English and Spanish, right? And then, you know, so making sure that those organizations that are providing digital inclusion services are meeting the need of our community. And a lot of that work happens on the ground by organization like yours, and you're really on the forefront of doing that. So again, digital inclusion ecosystem addresses all areas of digital divide, and that's why we keep talking about the literacy and digital skills training, broadband, but there is more, right? More areas that people need support, that it's part of digital inclusion work. And we really are looking to learn from you guys and say, hey, you didn't mention that this piece is important for digital equity, for digital inclusion. It's like, yeah, let's talk about it, because, you know, this is why we are here, to learn from you and share it out. So next slide. So within the digital inclusion ecosystem, there is, you know, some indicators. Again, it's really looking at, you know, does your community, maybe your city, your county, your state, have policies addressing all aspects of the digital divide? If there isn't, like, you know, how can we work together to make sure that there is, right? And then subsidize devices and affordable broadband services options. Does it meet the need of our community, or is it we only have one affordable option and is only for this side of town, right? So I'm not going to go through all the indicators of the ecosystem, but, you know, understand that ecosystem really for digital inclusion are more than just organizations and people providing service, but it's also policies, also infrastructure, it's also funding, support to do the work. So, you know, a lot of that work is done in conjunction with the next topic, which I shared with you guys a couple of times. If you go to the next slide, because I have more time, I want to have more time for Q&A. It's on coalitions. So, you know, coalitions are part of ecosystem, and a lot of what we have learned is that coalitions are a collective of organizations that sometimes are focused within the city, again, a neighborhood level, a state level, or regional level, and sometimes national level, to really come together and try to create this alignment on maybe on programming, on curriculum, on strategies for broadband. And I know we have a lot of experts here that are providing, build the middle mile and last mile into the community. So coalitions are a natural space for all those organizations to come together and try to create that cohesive voice, and really take the efforts from one individual organization to the collective impact for digital inclusion level. Next. So I'll go through this really quick. So coalition, what we have done is learning about digital inclusion coalitions, and the structure that they have is there's several layers. There's the community, right? Identify what is the community that this coalition wants to focus and serve. There are members of coalitions, usually the powerhouse of coalitions. So different organizations that provide different services. Some provide the connectivity options, some provide funding, some are just has political power. Some of our lived experts come together to talk about those issues and what does a digital inclusion ecosystem look like in our community, who is not at the table and who needs to be at the table, how can we create a more robust Wi-Fi network throughout the community, or sometimes have conversations, how can we collaborate and do a huge computer drive to make sure we help the school district to make sure that all the kids have access to a computer at home. So there's the member level, the other level is task force, and task force is really those, it's a working group where those members that are interested in that particular topic come together and work on strategies for delivering services or producing something in a collective manner. And then there's always a steering committee. There's a small group that provides strategic leadership and as well as a backbone organization, a backbone support. And that tends to be organization like yours that are providing the Digital Inclusion Coalition with convening power, administrative support, fiscal sponsorship. So all those organizations work together to be a backbone to support the entire coalition who serves the community. Next slide. So this is just a different diagram from what I just talked about. So you see that the red circle, the green circle, the bigger circle is the community. The white circle is the coalition for digital inclusion. That's how usually they tend to provide their structure and function. Within the coalition, the yellow circles are different organizations working together in different tasks and different efforts, right? So we want to do a digital equity plan for my community. Let's put a team together and think through and doing an advising group or having community listening tours. So usually that's how coalition functions, is through those action-oriented task force groups. And you see that the red little circle is a subset of organizations that come together to help guide the coalition and schedule meetings and think about the strategic leadership and focus of the coalition. And you see that some of the dots for backbone organizations, you can have more than one backbone organization. Sometimes backbone organizations are organizations that's part of the coalition. That's why you have a circle with side. And sometimes they're organization outside of the coalition that's just there to support. Like, I'm just here, I just want to fund the organization, or I just want to fund a project. The coalition wants to come together and do a needs assessment, right? So you have some of those support from outside of the coalition. Next slide. So you guys are lucky, you have 2 more slides. Then NDIA is going to launch a new coalition guidebook, which should be coming out soon after net inclusion. So next, in a couple weeks. So we've been meeting with coalitions around the country. So over 30 coalitions. I think some of you guys are here, or part of our focus group. And these are some of our takeaways on coalition building. And I won't go through this, but it's there, and then you guys can have access to it. So for us, we learned from them is that the coalition, when they're building a coalition, they want to make sure that the lesson learned is that coalition are built through continuous process and not an event or project. So coming together through herding cats, right? That's coming together and using that village concept to bring people to the table to collaborate. Usually it's the first step that you do to building a coalition. On the coalition, then they move into a structure, moving to a stage to build a structure. How are we going to make decisions together? Who's in charge of what? Who is part of the steering committee? Do I do an election? Do I do a nomination? How we make sure it's representation of the community you serve is part of the coalition. And other lessons on work of coalitions, that what they do is that coalitions really, a lot of them focus their scope on raising awareness and really identifying what are some of the barriers and how can we approach to do the work, how we can coordinate on efforts. There's coalitions also do the work by creating opportunities. Member organizations in the community sometimes go to coalitions, say, hey, I'm trying to connect this neighborhood with, bring broadband to this neighborhood and connectivity. Who from those organizations want to step in and help with that, or even just, overlay that and do a focused outreach for digital literacy skills? How many organizations can we tap into to provide affordable devices? So coalitions work in a bunch of different ways. And then coalition, there's always an adapting phase. So that next slide is my last slide. This is just to show that coalition building and coalition for digital inclusion, it's a process. It's not like, oh, you came together, we come up with a cool name, and we're a coalition. But we found that stage one of building coalition, if you guys are interested in building coalition as education institution, it's always at you always have a lot of power as a convening power, and as an anchor institution, is that partnering with your communities and asking people to be part of that process tends to be a first step on progressing through building a coalition. Again, the stage two, where we found some coalitions are in stage two now. They're building a structure, they're having a mission, and then you have some other examples there, how some coalitions have identified themselves as stage three because they're working the digital equity plan. And so the coalitions are moving that forward, and just, at stage five, as a caveat, like everything changes sometimes. So we have to evaluate and assess the needs of the community. How's the ecosystem changing? Do we still need a coalition to play this role in the community of just gathering people, or does the coalition needs to become a 501c3, or in case of North Carolina and in Charlotte, like they create the coalition became Digital Equity Institute, who is the organization who is gathering all the funding from the city, from the local partners, and it's going to go after the money of the state to build solutions for the community. So coalitions, again, it's been around for digital inclusion for 7, 8, 9 years, and it's been changing. So I thought it'd be helpful to share with you guys the progress. So with that, Camilla, back to you.
Awesome. All right, so we just have a few more slides. We have some tools here. The startup manual, it's a great manual that provides guidance and resources if you want to look into starting a community digital inclusion program. We have a free and low cost internet tool, which is a list of current offers from internet service providers, which is perfect for digital inclusion practitioners, librarians, service providers, where it shows you the low income households to acquire service at low or no cost. And then we also have a digital navigators where it shows you the model, as well as what Munire had talked about earlier, the Digital Inclusion Coalition Guidebook, which will be published after Net Inclusion. And then lastly, we'd love for you to join our thriving community. There are 3 ways to join. You can be a friend and affiliate, so you'd have access to the newsletter, access to our community listserv, which if anyone is on it, you know that it is thriving. I like to look at it as a group chat that is very supportive and sharing resources and asking questions. They all answer each other's questions. It's amazing. And then we have community calls. Our next one will be in March, where we're going to have the FCC come and talk. And then you can also become a subscriber. You have an annual subscription fee, and you will get the same benefits as an affiliate, but you also get discounts to NDIA events, as well as monthly subscriber calls and first dibs at working groups. Thank you, Stephanie. It is a gold mine. And then last thing I want to talk about is our community calls. I did talk about that already, so the next one will be in March. I also want to highlight a webinar that NDIA is hosting in about 2 weeks. So it's a webinar on ACP transition on Thursday, February 24th at 1 p.m. I'll share the link. You do have to register, but it is completely free, great information. You're going to talk about the ACP rules, and then, all right. And then after that, lastly, of course, we have Net Inclusion, like what Stephanie had mentioned, February 15th through 17th next week, stream online, completely free for you all. And then I'll stop sharing for some question and answer portion.
Well, thank you so much for this incredible overview. I just think digital inclusion is so important, and as nonprofit and not-for-profit organizations, research and education networks are poised to really make some change in the world. And this really lines up with their mission-driven work. So that's really exciting. I know I had a question about the ACP, the Affordable Connectivity Program, so formerly known as the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program, and now it's the Affordable Connectivity Program. Now, research and education networks usually serve community anchor institutions, so libraries, K-12 schools, higher ed, government. How might a research and education network take advantage of the Affordable Connectivity Program in order to help individuals get devices?
We are not the experts on ACP, but yeah, so that I know on the designation for that program, there is fund allocation for devices as well. So I think, you know, getting familiar with that program and figuring out how potentially, how can you put a system or a digital navigator that will help people to one, reach out, but also have people call in and say, hey, I want to sign up for this offer. What do I need to do? Can you help me? And so there is a voucher for that program, and for devices, and yeah, along with the connectivity. So, and then I really encourage you to join the webinar that's coming up, but there's a lot more, and I'm sorry, I'm not the best person to share about that, but I know there is a voucher there that you can tap into.
Yeah, and I just wanted it because I think it is motivation to tune into that seminar and figure out how we might be able to work with that. Thank you.
I like the comment of the last mile being changed to first mile, right? It's like it's the priority. Too bad we didn't control that terminology, Steve, but yeah, I totally agree with that. I know it was a lot, guys, and I'm like, so if you have any questions, comments, and you know, you can always follow up with us, but I would love to hear from you, like what's going on in your community, what are you guys trying to do? This is really a time for you guys to shine and really follow up with us. And sometimes me, myself, and Pamela might not be the expert in a particular area, but we can definitely help connect you with the right person within the NDIA to help you out in your local efforts. I'm trying to look in the chat, see if there's anything, but feel free to unmute yourself. And
I have a question. We actually on the listserv that we follow for you guys, there's been a lot of discussion of the ARPA funds, and we were wondering if you had any knowledge or thoughts on the ability of a research and education network to use those funds to hire a digital inclusion specialist or a digital navigator, or even to run a particular digital inclusion program.
Yeah, I can. So within ARPA, like there is some money that are going to this municipalities, right? To really close it can be used for digital inclusion. So what I know Coalitions has been doing a lot is actually advocating and talking to council and talking to like, hey, you should prioritize this money for programming and for services like digital navigator, like digital literacy training. And one is interesting because you asked that question, Teresa, is that part of some of the coalitions that have been advocating locally is that they need to have a research component. Like whoever you give this money for, you need to, you know, make sure that there's an evaluation at the end and make sure that we have lessons learned. So this is another way that, you know, your organization should start reaching out to the city, or just going and give your submitting your opinions for that money to be used in a smarter way, and especially for digital inclusion. Because, you know, just again, I work in digital inclusion, and sometimes people are like, hey, we connected, you know, 50 families, but then you see the speeds, or, you know, and the bandwidth that they're providing. It's like, can you actually say you're connecting them if they can not even, you know, check their emails, you know, 2 computers at a time? So having, you know, going a little bit deeper is one way to use the ARPA fund to really elevate the need for robust funding for digital inclusion.
Awesome, thank you.
Well, if anyone has any extra questions, please reach out to me and I can pass them along to our experts at the NDIA. I want to say thank you so much to our presenters. If you are interested in getting involved, please check out digitalinclusion.org. Also, if you end up becoming, or if you are a subscriber to NDIA, there are working groups about Digital Inclusion Week, guidebook creation, smart cities. I put a list in the chat. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you all.